Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Resistance Bureau Show. Today, our title is Gains and Gaps 2025 Elections and Gender in Africa. It's a conversation that we're holding against the backdrop of the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, and also marks the first day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. My name is Njoya. I am your host today, and I'm very honored to open up this conversation on a day that calls for us to reflect, to act, as well as to amplify the voices of women across our continent. So tonight we're bringing together three extraordinary young women who are reshaping political life in Africa. They're joining us from Ghana, from Namibia, from Uganda, and they're here to reflect on leadership, the barriers young women face in politics, but also what meaningful political presence looks like in practice, especially because we have someone from Ghana where the vice president is female, but also Namibia, where the president is female. So I will just do a rough introduction so that you have a sense of who they are before we start the conversation. So I have joining us today as Ndam from Ghana. She's a pastor, youth leader, entrepreneur, and strategic development practitioner. Ndam rose to national youth prominence as SRC president at the University of Ghana. She has led election-focused youth mobilization in 2024 and founded Election Lounge, a platform that champions youth and female political participation. She brings experience in international trade, event curation, and startup ecosystems. We are also joined by Esther Shakela from Namibia. She's a public servant, policy strategist, and emerging voice in leadership. Esther currently serves as a personal assistant to a former president in Namibia, which places her at the Center of Executive Coordination, Diplomacy, and National Representation. She's the editor of The Young Observer and founder of Kindle by Kalila, a leadership development platform that's grounded in aligned principle of leadership. Last but not least, we have Yvonne Mpambara from Uganda, a lawyer, youth leader, and social justice advocate and presidential aspirant who has stepped into the national political arena. We'll hear directly from her about what it takes to run, to mobilize young people, but also to withstand the pressures of national politics. So over the next 1 hour, we'll ask them questions about their journeys, the gaps they're pushing to close, the congregations that we can build on ahead of future elections across the continent. But we're also going to reflect on what the presence and leadership of women in Ghana and Namibia have meant for them and how it shapes the leadership landscape for women in future elections. After my initial questions to each guest, I will transition to questions that come from you as the audience. So if you have any questions across the conversation, if you're watching on Zoom, you can share it on the chat. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just share it wherever. You can also send us as a DM on Twitter. Just look for the Resistance Bureau. And remember that we're streaming on Facebook and YouTube. So if you're not able to join us, you'll still be able to catch the recording a bit later. But we also invite you to share a link to the space, to this conversation, so that people that may be interested in the conversation, that may benefit from the conversation, can also be a part of it. So with this said, I will just get straight into the conversation. And I will start with you, Yvonne. As a young woman that has aspired to run for president in Uganda, what motivated your candidacy? And how have you navigated the initial, skepticism or structural pushback from established political actors?
Thank you so much, especially for that introduction. My name is Yvonne Mpambara. I was an aspiring presidential candidate for 2026. Uganda is holding its elections next year in January. And I was among the only women, actually 3 women, that successfully submitted forms to be considered for nominations to be on the ballot. But unfortunately, the powers that be chose an all-male ballot, where we ended up with 8 men on a ballot and no single woman. So my motivation to run for presidency was profoundly, largely personal, but also profoundly national. We know that politics definitely runs in everyday aspects of our lives. We know that, it's reflected in the roads we use, it's reflected in the daily lives we live, it's reflected in the schools we attend, the schools we send our children to, the hospitals we go to, how we relate with others. Majority of our lives are largely political, but also national, in terms of the fact that I was looking at a vision for transforming this country to a Uganda that works for all. We feel that we've reached a point in Uganda's political culture where we're at crossroads, and we feel that majority of us are being largely left out of politics, especially young people, especially women. We feel that the representation of what the political landscape is right now is not representative of our demographic, but it's also not representative or meaningfully representative of our gender. It is definitely reflected in the way that the ballot for 2026 has turned out. And from the core set of one of the reasons why I'd run, it was to break those barriers that, women are just as legitimate and capable leaders as men, and the society needs to slowly start tuning into the fact that women make great leaders, just like the women have led for centuries and decades, and they've ably led, and they've never been questioned in terms of how they lead. So we felt that it's time. It's 2025, honestly. It's time that we start changing our minds in terms of how we consider women as leaders, but also not just considering them as leaders, to see how they can meaningfully nurture countries like Uganda back to the right track, because we feel right now where it is, it's slowly retrogressing in terms of human rights, in terms of development, and in so many other spheres where we feel we should be progressing. We feel that we are either stagnant or we feel that we're retrogressing. But also it's realizing that, for majority of the times, people are worried about certain levels of politics, especially the presidency. If you've noticed the nature of how majority of leaders look, especially in the African continent, I'll use Uganda largely as an example. Most of the considerations for who a president looks like, people will paint for you a picture that looks like Museveni. They assume that a leader or a capable leader in Uganda looks like Museveni, which we definitely know is not true. Or the fact that they assume that the only kind of leadership you can have, or the only way you can lead a country or join politics, is if you've been in electoral positions before, which we feel is very unfair, because these are positions that have become largely ring-fenced. They get kept by people that have money, that have built influence over time, or like famous musicians like Bobby Wine that have had large influences of following. But then what happens to those capable leaders that are there in community, that have worked side by side with communities for a long time, and they're capable leaders of being in this space, but they're not being given the opportunities because, one, they don't have a large pool of resources, or two, there are so many structural and cultural barriers that hinder them from participating. Like women, we have so many potential women who can lead, but because of the mindsets of a majority of Ugandans, they assume that women are automatically not good leaders. So they've attached politics to what is largely strongman politics. They've attached it to military credentials. They've attached to old age, and it's a very traditional understanding of politics. So I felt that my role at this point is not to just sit by on the sidelines, but to try and break the barriers of how people understand what politics is, that young people and women have very strong visions for Uganda, just like other people have had, just like people with money, which I don't even feel like majority of people with money have had really sensible visions for this country. But I felt that it's my duty, it's no one else's duty but mine, that if I don't step forward to do it, no one else will be able to do it. So it was largely personal, but also it was profoundly national.
I love a lot of what you said, because like you mentioned, that they need to change the face of politics. I think this is very powerful, because our politics and independence has not had young people, has not had women. I think the last time we had young people in politics was actually during the transition from colonial to post-colonial Africa. And I think one of the things that you mentioned as well was just thinking about changing the attitudes about, women as leaders in our countries. So my next question would be, like, what are some of the strategies that you found very effective, especially for convincing young people that a vote for you is actually a vote for systemic change? And how do we begin to transform that youth energy, enthusiasm into organized electoral power?
Maybe parts of what I didn't answered about the original question that you asked on how I've been able to meander around this kind of landscape is staying focused largely. It's a landscape that is very testing, but you have to have a very clear vision for what you want, and you have to be very, very fierce and aggressive to push. Majority of these people have accumulated power, they've accumulated resources, they've accumulated so much influence that they're not willing to budge to let any other person enter into these spaces. So it's largely pushing, largely trying to infiltrate. It's also being very intentional with holding power accountable to make sure that, we do not continue the same trend of politics, the same political gimmicks that people have played over and over, the same political culture that we are fighting against right now. For example, when I was trying to run, you know how majority of Africans in general, I would say it's even a global trend. Politics has been attached to a price tag. If you're trying to engage people, they're asking you for monetary support, or they're asking you to give them monetary handouts. It becomes very difficult for people like myself, who definitely don't have a large basket of resources to be able to handle, to give each and every person I come in contact with money. So it's standing on the principles that, we are a generation that is not taking the nonsense of monetized politics, and we mean it. So it's standing on that integrity and pushing and telling people that, listen, we're actually not willing to compromise anymore. If you also continue to ask for money, this is on you. These are the leaders you're pushing in, and it's a reason why they're treating you the way you are. It's a reason why you're in the situations of why you are, because you continue to enable some of this behavior. So we need to change. We need to change the mindsets. We need to be intentional about how we push. If we also continue doing the politics the same way we've been fighting the people who are in the spaces now, we will end up in a vicious cycle of what politics is, honestly. I've tried to convince young people. First of all, I would say that I've worked with the majority of my communities for long. So most of these young people know us already. We are not new faces to them. Despite how, when you come into the presidency, for example, or some of these electoral positions, people are asking you, where are you coming from? We've worked with communities for a very long time. We've done so much work with communities. We made sure that we are moving smart investments communities, making sure that, the people we know are well and safe. So by the time we are entering some of these spaces, we know that we have the endorsement of majority of the communities, especially young people being my largest constituency. I already had engaged with the majority of them. Most of them already knew me, and I knew that I had a reason for why I was actually going to run. But it's also relating to the kind of issues that they continue to face. We've reached a point in our leadership and in our political space where young people feel they are genuinely fed up. And I think this is not just in Uganda. They feel, you look at the protests in Kenya, look at the protests in Tanzania. We saw them crossing over to, I think, Madagascar. I saw it in a couple of countries. It's young people trying to show you that, listen, they are tired. They need to see something change. And they feel that as a voice and as young people that are emerging, new generations of, young people that are emerging into these spaces, they feel they're not heard. They feel they're not accessing opportunities. So it's, what I've done largely is trying to make sure that the manifest I'm pushing out to them, or the vision that I'm pushing for Uganda, really looks at what young people relate to, what they need, what they feel the solutions are. So we've been working on solutions with them. It's not been a separate kind of thing. We've been trying to find these solutions with young people at the same time. So when you convince them that, that you're not doing this for yourself, also that you're not trying to pull in the same kind of politics that has left them disgruntled, that has left them frustrated, majority of them are actually willing to listen. And it's what we've noticed, that when you show them that your voice is also reflecting what their voice is, that you're not willing to just have solutions by yourself alone, that you're willing to work with them, that we're willing to work with them in a people-centered approach where they make majority of the decisions, where they're able to dialogue with most of their leaders, where they feel that they're not going to be worried about who the next leader is going to be, because they've seen that level of torture, they've seen that level of kidnapping, they've seen the level of repression, how much they've been oppressed for just trying to be themselves, for just trying to use their energy as young people to show that they are capable of being leaders, but to also show that they are capable of participating in a mature democracy. So it's working in close collaboration with them. It's showing them that the issues that they are fronting, you relate with them, you're a fellow young person, but also you know how exactly politics work, and you're willing to sacrifice and enter in there, master it, lead, show them that there's a phase that can be a leadership phase, and that they do not have to be worried, that there's someone with integrity who is willing to step into these spaces and do the right thing, despite the fact that, we've been told for a long time that, politics look like one face. No, it's not true. Young people can lead as well. Young people can be presidents. Young people are stepping into these spaces to show that we are just as capable. We are capable leaders who are able to run this country just as well as the older versions. So we are stepping into it to show that we are just as capable.
I actually love that. And I want to say congratulations to you and also courage and strength to you because it's definitely not an easy journey. And I know we're having the conversation earlier that, it's very powerful and inspiring that young women are actually rising to the task because beyond the fact that the politics has been gendered, there's also the issue of age where a lot of African countries will tell you that for you to run for president, you need to be 40 going upwards. So I like what you're saying about, building a kind of politics where young people can relate to it. They can see their challenges not only being conceptualized, but also the solutions that are being developed and they're part of, the co-creation of those solutions. So I will come back to you later, but I also think there is a comment for you in the chat. Please look at it and then we'll discuss it a little bit later. But Esnam, I want to bring you into the conversation because in 2016, you rose to prominence as SRC president and then later played a major role in the 2024 elections in Ghana, supporting the current vice president. So what were the most important leadership lessons that you carried from campus politics into national politics? And how did those lessons shape your approach to engaging young people in 2024?
I'm sorry, would you want to repeat the final part of the question again?
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I was just kind of trying to link, your experience in SRC at university and thinking about what some of the most important leadership lessons were for you that you carried from campus politics into national politics, especially thinking about the ways that it allowed you to engage with young people.
Right. Thank you, first of all, to you, your team, the Resistance Bureau, and also for creating a room as this where people can be able to, share their thoughts and their experiences in the space of leadership. Regarding my experience from the University of Ghana, that was back in 2016, and culminating it into what I do now, I think that for campus is very organic. The energies are high. Young people want to see stuff. They want to be able to relate with your leaders, and they want to be able to ascertain the genuine intentions that you have as a leader for them. And it's one of the things that really has stood with me through the journey as a young politician in Ghana. When success is accounted for, when you are seeing the tangibles of every output after you've been voted for. And so when you reflect that through the national politics space as well, campaigning meant that I had to make sure whoever my candidate was is the kind that will be able to show working, show output, show evidence of things that they have done, sometimes even through their political party in the past if they were not the initial candidate, and things that they're going to be doing better. And most importantly, ascertaining the essence of empowering the young people to drive them along. So I'll give you an example of the difference that we had in, let's say, 2020 elections and 2024 elections, where in the past it looked more of we're mobilizing these people and we want them to come and vote. But fast forward in 2024, we rather had not just mobilizing, which is something that the university politics taught me, but empowering. So I would, in the past, delegate so much responsibility and let people feel that they are in charge, and let young people feel that we acknowledge their wisdom, we acknowledge their innovation, and we are looking forward to them using these ideas in making things better, And that was one of the things that really helped my political party in Ghana during the elections that saw the election of the first female vice president. And that was a huge success.
Thank you so much, Esnam, for this. And I think one of the things that I love about what you're mentioning is that having an intention about the kind of people that you're actually campaigning for. And I think that's very important. And I think a lot of times when you talk about, leadership of young people, leadership of women, there's always a conversation, oh, they're not capable. They don't have the necessary training. We'll talk a little bit later about, the kind of spaces that can be created for young people to gain the kind of knowledge and the skills that they need. But I wanted to speak a little bit about, Election Lounge, which is a platform that you founded to increase youth and female participation. So what are some of the, barriers that, Election Lounge still faces when trying to move young women from interest to candidacy? And also what are some of the interventions that you found most effective to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. So for election launch, somewhere along, I think 2018 or so, I decided to have um, some initial uh, mobilization of student leaders from different universities. Now, what happened was that when it came to empowering people who had gone through the student political phase with interest of doing national politics, I just needed to help hold the hand from interest to actual participation. And that is one of the things that interested me so much. And I realized that the political party that I was a part of, or I am a part of, which is the NDC, which is the National Democratic Congress, seemed to have more audience for young people in that time. So for most people that went through our hands and went through our system, we had to do a hand-holding um, journey with them. So, for instance, having people pair up with candidates that were contesting at that time who needed some fresh ideas, who needed, some walking into. And it's a very profound thing because we realized that most of these people who really felt that they were ready to do lamb-like politics realized that it was a different ballgame altogether when it comes to the national front. And so it is good for us to say, yes, we want to have young people and women, fill in the representation and be there. But the question is, do we know and are we sure of their capabilities and their bandwidth and their potential in fixing them? Because I've also noticed that there have been a few people who are young who have been given the agency and they get there and they don't even understand what they're supposed to do because they failed to build momentum from their younger experience through student politics. And mind you, we have over 70% of student politics population making up those who enter international politics because it's just a natural transgression. So Election Lounge was that platform that said, hey, before you feel that you can be able to get onto the national platform, can we solidify the basics? Can we make sure that you know what you're going to do? Because it is not business as usual. Imagine competing with people who have put together so much wealth from different sources, people who have traveled the walks of the earth um, because they want to have political power on the African continent. You are going to compete with these people. What is your compelling point? So that is one of the things that Election Lounge did. Another thing we also did was, and of course, because I'm a pastor, we had to bring people together in a religious setting because we realized that it was getting very, very heated in our communities. It was getting very almost volatile, if I want to put it. And we felt that having to key into people's religious emotions was a way of taming the youth in their energy, and stuff like that. So we held like a national prayer event on a big pack. And we said, hey, wherever you are, you want to just show up. We had a few good numbers show up, but we realized that the interest was the end and not the means to the end. Everybody was just willing to see like we are going on elections. We agitated. We want to kick the government of the day out. Yes, we love God, but we really want to do this campaign. And so for us as an organization, we had to sit and say, you know what, maybe we have to do some timing, right? We would have to change the narrative as well. So that also gave room for us to open up for more ideas on what we can do, not just in Africa, but also on the continent. So, for instance, there's an election happening in January, right, in Uganda. And even though Election Lounge is not there, I'm asking myself, what could I have done if I had known that this is what, could have been the possibility of help for the candidate who felt could have been on the ballot. So, yeah, to answer your question, these are some of the things that we did. And it can only get better with time. Thank you.
I actually like that, and it's part of what we try to do with the Resistance Bureau platform to build connections between people that are in the political space, civil society, media, academia, and to create space for learning. Because, like you say, that there's a lot of work that you're doing, And because you already have like a vice president, that's a woman. Namibia has a female president, and it's those kind of learnings that we can get from each other, and also just strategies in terms of like mobilizing. And I also love the fact that you also integrated the religious aspect as well, because in a lot of our countries, whether it's Christianity in its different form, or it's Islam in different ways, it's places that really have a lot of influence. And so recognizing that and being able to access those spaces, because it's not just recognizing it, it's the fact that you have access to those spaces and being able to use them in a very positive way. So one of the questions I have for you before I move on to Esther, it's just this question of how is Ghana under a female leader, because it's the first time. And for you guys, it's been interesting because you're the founding leaders of independence in Africa. You're the first country that got independent in sub-Saharan Africa. So how is Ghana under a female president, and how have you seen that shift the experience and the aspirations of young people, especially young women, when it comes to political?
No, of course. It was a huge thing we're all looking forward to. When you consider the West African continent, our culture plays a huge part in leadership. It's like a bitter bowl. You can't get away with it. And so right from the time of then, I was privileged to be on most of the campaign trails to different places, and you could see the excitement of the local women, the excitement of young girls and children who would walk in and say, hey, my dreams are valid, right? So there was that place of like a support, like an emotional support that was coming from just her candidature, but also a reassuring way of communicating to the rest of the world that, hey, we have room to grow, especially for those in the West who feel, well, Africa, we don't really have that bandwidth and capacity. And I mean, look at Namibia, and I'm sure Yvonne is going to speak soon about these experiences with her being in the presidential suite all the time. We are seeing that leadership has some grace to it. Personally, I would have loved if our vice president was, she's a woman, yes, but a little more younger with some more energy. She has energy. I mean, for somebody who is above 70 years old and doing all these rounds and stuff like that. And I would say maybe baby steps. But imagine having a young lady in her 40s who's a vice presidential candidate. The world cannot stop her. So there is some more work that can be done. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm really, really happy that Ghana got the chance of, in our part of the world, aside Liberia that had, a substantive president being a woman, we can be able to create a narrative of the possibility of the women doing most of these things. It's been great, very graceful. Anytime she walks into a room, it's so soft, and she brings that malleability of democracy. And I mean, we're enjoying it. We're enjoying it, I'd say.
We love it for you guys, and we'll come there and be, co-citizens. And I think, Esther, this is a good space to bring you in. And I think my first question would also be in kind of the same spirit, because Namibia is the only country in Africa right now where women not only hold like the top 3 government positions, that's your president, vice president, speaker of the National Assembly, but also the fact that more than half of the cabinet is also women. So how has that experience been for you as Namibians? And also, how do you see it influencing, the way that young women, the way that women look at themselves and the possibility of taking up space in leadership?
Thank you for the question, Mantate, and good evening to everyone who is joining us live, and especially to my fellow participants. Having a female president for us as Namibians has been refreshing, but it has also been a learning curve, because undoubtedly people had some speculations about what her leadership is going to look like, because we have never really had a woman step up to that level of power in the country. So there were certainly a lot of questions, a lot of scrutiny, so much doubts, if you want to call it, and just genuine wonder to say, how is Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah going to navigate leading in a patriarchal nation and also on a patriarchal continent, for lack of better phrasing. And truly so far, she has always reminded us, even as she was vice president last year, that it is going to be business unusual for Namibians, and her trajectory or her term thus far has proved to be business unusual. And a lot of Namibians are certainly of the sentiment that, it's much better to have a mother at the helm of power because she's considerate, she has the people at heart more, and even with the policies, for example, one on free education that she recently mentioned, or that she recently basically spearheaded and introduced, people are starting to feel that a mother or a woman, let's not even call her a mother, because sometimes we try to mother female politicians or female leaders too much, but people definitely have been feeling that she brings this feminine energy to governance, and that feminine energy has translated into effective and efficient public service delivery, that it has translated into improved governance, because she has demonstrated inarguably a heart and a passion for Namibian people, a heart and a passion even for Africans, through her Pan-Africanist ideals, as well as through a basically much more Pan-Africanist approach to even foreign policy and to how the country basically handles bilateral relations, as well as its approach to multilateralism. And I think truly what that has done for young women, or even if we can call it the girl child in Namibia, is that previously where one would ask themselves, am I able to ascend to this position of power? Am I able to become a minister? Am I able to become a CEO of Nam Water, for example? The question has now shifted to, how do I do that? Not really can I, but how do I do that? So it is now simply a question of alignment. It's a question of what qualifications, or how do I position myself into getting into this particular position, as opposed to, is that even a possibility? And I think really I would want to share something that is very characteristic of Namibian politics, even prior to the election of Her Excellency Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah as our fifth and first female president. The SWAPO party of Namibia is a political party that has been ruling Namibia for the past 35 years, although, of course, we have seen a change of power from one person to another, but of course, coming from the same political party, which is why Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah is the fifth president of the country. But something that they have done, which I believe is truly commendable, is that they have adopted as a party what is called a 50-50 policy, otherwise also referred to as the zebra style, which then makes provision that for every male leader, there is a female leader. And that is what has really contributed to Namibia, ensuring that we have 50% of women who are making up the National Assembly, the National Council. If you have a top four with the president, vice president, prime minister, deputy prime minister, then you already know that if two are women, the other two are going to be men. And they have truly institutionalized it, not to basically encourage tokenism, but just to recognize that women are equally capable. However, we cannot speak of inclusion if we do not take targeted interventions that ensure women are actually able to participate beyond us just encouraging them to, when we know very well that the spaces for such leadership positions are not exactly conducive for them to get one foot in. So we've had that policy for quite a while in the country, and that is what has also then resulted in us having increased and improved leadership positions for women, if one can call it that. And really, we have seen the barriers being broken and, the ceilings being absolutely shattered, because even I think in 2020, the late president, His Excellency Dr. Hage Geingob, appointed a 23-year-old young woman. Thereafter, he appointed a 22-year-old young woman. Currently, our youngest member of parliament is actually an undergraduate student who is 22, if I'm not mistaken, Honorable Feni Duchavi. So we have had leaders who definitely have demonstrated to us through action that young women should be at the forefront, that women can lead, and they have given them the support. And also they have ensured that the support is entrenched in the systems, in the processes, and in the institutions, so that our women empowerment ideals and aspirations definitely go beyond just sloganeering or ideals or wishful thinking. So I think truly coupled with Her Excellency's ascendancy to power and some of the policies that we have in the Namibian context, it has definitely allowed for us as young women to really look at ourselves and be convinced that, you know what, I can quite virtually do anything that I put my mind to. And you know that even starting from your home base or from your ground, which is your country, you have a conducive environment to do so.
I love this so much. I think one of the things that you mentioned is this idea of her bringing, feminine energy to politics. And I think it's so, so important because it also speaks to normalizing feminine energy in politics, because for the longest time, it's always been viewed from this, masculine perspective. And I also love the fact that you're just reminding us that beyond just us speaking about needing young women and women in power, there's need for us to have a conversation of how do we build the capacity and knowledge of women so that if they take up these spaces, they're able to do a good job? Because like you mentioned, there's a lot of questions that come with women when they take up positions of power. There are certain questions that men are not asked, that women will be asked. There's a lot of scrutiny. And when a woman fails, the conversation is always about women fail whenever they're given this kind of position. It's never a conversation of this particular political party. So I thought that was very, very important. We're very inspired. It's really exciting to see what Namibia is doing. And I hope our countries as well learn. We hope that, the Vaughan in Uganda also takes up space, because I think it's very powerful, like you say, that when the girl child sees someone that looks like them, it begins to be a different question from, can I do this, to how do I actually do it? But I think what's interesting about you as well is the fact that you've also had the privilege to serve, and you continue to serve as a personal assistant to the former president of Namibia. So how has that role allowed you, or shaped your understanding of executive power, especially when it comes to youth and women's representation?
I think definitely one truth is that working in the presidency is a little like working or being inside a ship. Let me liken it to being inside a ship. So you are not the captain, but you have a thorough understanding and a much better view of all the moving parts. You have a much better lens of the direction in which you are heading, and you're also better able to observe what the captain goes through in order to steer the ship. And I think really working in the presidency has exposed me to a fundamental reorientation of what I thought leadership was. So ordinarily, you would think executive power is something that you can romanticize. You think it is as simple as waking up and deciding that, you know what, we're building a road from Windhoek to Okahanja tomorrow, and then all the pieces sort of just fall into place. But what I've really come to learn is that executive power and authority is something that requires humility, it requires patience. Most importantly, it requires for one to have sound judgment. And ultimately, it is also important to know that it is a kind of leadership, or it is a kind of authority that does not just seek to assert dominance or to establish a kind of presence that cannot be questioned, but that it is actually to steward responsibility. And that at the heart of that responsibility is the people, and that your power and your decisions and that authority that you have must always revert to the people, because they're the reason that you have that authority and that power in the first place. So I think it has really taught me to always understand that when systems are functional, they're actually meant to safeguard both the one who has the power as well as the people. And Dr. Hage would always remind us of systems, institutions, and processes, and he would continuously admonish us to always safeguard them to ensure that they're able to deliver, and really just reminding us that without them, we're not able to execute, we're not able to deliver, we're not able to get anything, and that these institutions, systems, and processes should outlive us. And that also has given me a revelation truly about women and youth representation, because it has opened my eyes to understanding, or to seeing rather, that just having a voice is not what translates directly into impact, or just being present, being visible is not what translates necessarily into having an influence, for example, on the decisions that I made or the outcomes of a particular meeting or the policy ecosystem, if you would like to even enter into that space. So what I've noticed is that many a times we are able to talk, we're able to enter into spaces and we gain some sort of visibility, but because we do not have an understanding of how the policy ecosystem works, because some of our submissions are not credible or they are not structured or they are not even data-driven or basically aligned with a systems thinking kind of approach, then they sort of fall into the cracks. Because at the end of the day, when people come to the table and they have to make decisions, they are not just going to consider that Esther is articulate, she's eloquent, and that she spoke very well on that panel the other day. Therefore, I think we should make this a national priority. We can apply pressure through the voices and basically through mobilizing ourselves to really speak on issues and matters and, sort of like push back with government to say, we need you to deliver this on so-and-so timelines. However, beyond that, our voices must translate into tangible submissions that can be tabled and that can be taken seriously. And this is, of course, not to invalidate the importance of mobilization or the importance of pressure groups, neither the importance of really having a courageous public voice. But I think working in this space has really just deepened my understanding of how governance actually works and how these processes actually take root and what it means or what it takes for something to become a national priority and for it to truly become something that later on we can champion and say that, look, we're asking for you to, for example, amend the Combating Rape Act of 2021. And I would like to actually give an example here that in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, young people, specifically young women, took to the streets in Namibia and they were complaining of high cases of femicide, gender-based violence, and they basically asked the government to declare a state of emergency, citing that women are starting to feel increasingly unsafe in Namibia and that it is high time that the authorities stepped in and did something more tangible about it. But something that was very, very, very key to pick up from that protest or from that outcry was that the organizers or that the young people had actually organized themselves in such a manner that they had a petition that was data-driven, that had all these key bullet points outlined to say, we want you to do this because of this, we want you to look at this because of this, and they gave solutions to say, if you can look at this legislative act in our country and table a motion through the Minister of Justice on this date. By next year, we can have an amendment act. By this time, we can have training for officers as first responders. The Ministry of Gender can come in to do ABCD. Here's where you can get volunteers. They did all of that. And what ended up happening then is that the president at the time actually called them to State House and sat them down and said, okay, how do we do this? That you're asking, this report that you've given, how do we implement this? And I can tell you today that the Combating of Rape Amendment Act bill has been passed, as well as that one of the Gender-Based Violence Act has also been passed since 2021. It is now fully being enforced through all the relevant authorities and channels. So it has really taught me that beyond the sloganeering, beyond holding up the fist, beyond choosing to shut down the streets, whatever it is that you are submitting, especially to a functional institution or an institution that is able to deliver to you what you are seeking and what you're looking for, you need to be prepared. And what you are sharing needs to be credible. What you are submitting needs to be data-driven. It needs to be structured and it needs to be comprehensive so that it is in a much better state to be adopted and to be streamlined as well as to be pursued.
Thank you so much for this, and also kudos to you, because I can imagine that this is not an easy job. And also, I think it's very powerful to see a young woman in that role, because I think for a lot of people, when they imagine a personal assistant to a president and even a former president, people always imagine someone older, a man if it's a male president. So I think it's powerful that you're taking up that space and you're doing so well, because you also represent young people and young women. I wanted to ask you a question before we transition into the questions that are coming in and comments from the audience. One of the things that I'm interested to know, based on your experience, is just the intergenerational dynamics in working in a space with senior politicians, because that's a big thing that always comes up in conversations about politics. What has that looked like for you, and what are some of the strategies that you would love to share with other young people in different countries in Africa that might be working with seniors to say, this is how you guys can go about it, or these are the things that you can look out for? That would be great to hear.
Thank you for the question, Mantate. I think, first of all, I would like to just highlight that the seniors differ from country to country. And I think that is very important to keep in mind, because one would not want to think that there is sort of like a one size fits all kind of approach, because it can, some of the strategies that I use or how I navigate the workspace that I have been in might not exactly work in a different context or even in a different country. So I think primarily I am grateful that the seniors that I have been privileged to work with are, I don't want to say normal, but the seniors that I have been privileged to work with are quite wonderful. And I think I will always be eternally, pardon me, grateful to them for giving a young person like myself a chance to work literally the apex of national governance, and without too much experience for that matter. Because, of course, being a young person at my age, you will not really expect that I have had 20 years of experience before being asked to step into this role. But I am really grateful that they basically were willing to take a chance on me and have been willing to mentor and guide and support and still hold my hand throughout everything, despite the intensity of the job and despite the pressures and the demands of the job. I think something that I have really done by the grace of God, honestly, is for me to just understand that our generations differ. Our generations really differ so contrastingly. And I think having an understanding of that is what allows me to sort of navigate these spaces, because where it's easy for me to set up a live on Instagram and talk about something, the next person might not exactly have the same tech savvy as I do, or where I feel like, something is just wrong. Where I have that youthful vigor and youthful energy to say, let's just do it now, just make the phone call. You have the power to do so. The other person has experience or they have institutional memory that suggests otherwise. So I think really to answer the question is that it requires a lot of humility, and it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of wisdom, and that can be obtained from a variety of people, even around the office. You can always ask the next person in the office to say, I'm facing this particular challenge, or with this particular task, I'm not sure I'm able to fully deliver the way that I think I can. Can you please advise? Can you please step in? Can you please let me know what I should do? And that humility is sort of disarming. Because what I've noticed with a lot of young people, when they interact with elders, they come with a very brusque approach. That is also the case in Namibia. They come with a very brusque approach. They come with you are an ancestor, you don't know what you're talking about, for all we could care, you guys could just, perish or something of the sort. And of course, when you approach them with that energy, then the reciprocation is also very hostile and negative, or at least that has been my observation. But for some reason, when you come with all humility and sometimes, falsely admitting even that, I actually really don't understand this, I would really appreciate your advice, you sort of get more out of it. And being in an intense pressure kind of environment, it is also just important to continuously give your best, continuously stay learning. Never think that you being in that position is a destination, and that you now approach everything with I have arrived, or that the young people outside they don't know anything and I know better than they do anything. It is just always to ensure that you remain in touch with your roots, but also really it is important to understand that the other people are literally from a different generation. And I will give an example to this effect. I have worked with people who have been in exile, for example. They've gone into exile during the liberation struggle. Some of them as young as 17, 18. They've been in exile for 30 years plus, trained soldiers. Some of them got an education. And before they left the country, there was literally nothing, not a single building. We didn't have schools. People could not buy bread if you are brown in color or complexion, rather. So there were all these things that did not exist. We didn't have a university. We didn't have NAST or UNAM as University of Namibia up until after independence. So now speaking to an 84-year-old, for example, and telling them that the country is not developed, or the country has done nothing, or even that the party has done nothing. That can come across as very shocking for them, because in their mind, they have a before and an after. And of course, in my mind, I only have right now and the aspiration that I think my nation could look like. So, of course, having that in mind, I know then that if I say that, you guys as leaders have done nothing for this country, that is a trigger, because for them, they feel like, what do you mean? We have a university now. We have 3, in fact. We have a mall. We have this. We have roads. We have everything that was literally not there before. So how can you guys safely say that? But they also, of course, don't understand that. For me, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I've been to Dubai. I think really we can do much better than this. So I think it's just a matter of understanding where the other person might be standing, where their mindset might be from, how they might be looking at things, and then just finding a way to adjust to that without stepping on anybody's shoes. And then, of course, knowing that there is also a lot to learn from those who are not young. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those lessons. And I think they cut across not just in politics, but also in the other different spaces where young people get to work with older people. But also I think it's a message to the older people as well, that in the same spirit that young people are coming in with the humility to ask for help, just also reminding them that, there are certain things that young people might know that they also get to be open to. So I think I love the kind of environment where young people are learning, and the other side as well is learning. And it allows for that space, like you're saying, where we begin to understand what the aspiration is for a 17-year-old in 2025 against the aspiration of someone that's 80, that's looking back and saying, when I was 17, this is where we were. So I think this has been powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm very excited to see, how she continues to lead. And I'm actually working on my master's thesis. It's on her. So I'm very excited to continue to see what her leadership looks like, and also to see how other countries continue to grow, to have more women in power. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into some of the comments and the questions that came in from the audience. Some are specific, and then there's also some general ones. So what I'll do is I will give a comment to each person, and then I will read all of them so that you have, a moment to just think about it. But there was a comment from Uganda that's responding to Yvonne's submissions earlier. So the comment says, we really need support on mental health awareness, counseling, and guidance. We need to empower minds and enrich lives. So I would love for Yvonne to speak to this, but I also want to open it up for you guys later when you come in to respond to yours, to say, what is the mental health part of this, but also the physical and emotional health part of this work that you are doing. And this is also thinking about both the people that you're mobilizing, that you're working with, but also yourself as well. What has mental health and self-care looked like for you? So I think that's the first question that I'd want for you to all respond to, starting with Yvonne. And then another question that came in was for Ndam. So it says Ghana seems to be working to increase women's leadership through initiatives like the Affirmative Action Act, aiming for 30% women in leadership by 2026. What do you make of these policies? Will this help improve women in leadership positions? So this is for you, Ndam. And then there's a question for you, Esther, that says the gains of women political leadership are notable, but domestic violence remains a very significant concern, as do economic disparities, despite legal protections. So this seems more cultural, though. What more needs to be done here to protect the lives and voices of women who may not be involved in political spheres? So what I'll do is I'll ask Yvonne to come in first to reflect on that, both on the sides of people, but yourself as well. And then for the other two questions, Ndam, you'll go first, and then Esther, it will be you. But please start from that reflection on self-care for you, what it has looked like, some of the advice that you can give about that. So Yvonne, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'll pick on right from where we left off. And I feel there are bits in the gaps of some bits I was not able to submit, but also largely because I think we've not catered to all the questions that have been posed before us. But on the aspect of safety, on the safety of so many women that have joined politics, there's a lot that is still largely centered around the structural barriers that we continue to face when we're trying to either access these spaces or trying to ably compete, or, you know, trying to even just campaign. I was giving my experience, I think, a few days ago when a team from one of the communications platforms I was on was asking what the experience was like, and I had to tell them that there's so much violence that women face that is multifaceted that I think majority never even get to talk about. And, you know, right from the state-sanctioned violence of what women face, I was talking about how, you know, I was very aware that they had sent men to get me pregnant, but also not just that you have to be on your tippy toes because someone is either willing to make you drop out by making you sick or, you know, being poisoned, but also the fact that, you know, the state sanctions so much violence that you end up becoming victims of kidnaps, of torture. One of my colleagues was tortured in Tanzania, but also others that had crossed to Uganda to join some of the campaigns, and etc. ended up facing the same fate. So women are on top of whatever, you know, societal structural barriers they're already facing, have to deal with this entire, you know, violence that is both from the state, but also from men, from society sanctioned violence, but also online as well. The online space has developed into something much bigger than ourselves. We know that it's largely a digital era, but also there's so much unchecked violence, technology facilitated violence is on a rise, you know. For majority of the times, people are calling me certain things that, you know, I rarely see them calling male candidates. Someone had told me that I'm a spy who had slept with Kagame, who had come to destabilize the Ugandan government. Another had told me, you know, that I'm making my way to the top to run for presidency by sleeping with so many different levels of MPs, or, you know, there's so much that they're inflicting against women that they have to deal with at the end of the day that we feel should be, you know, discussed, but also the fact that now artificial intelligence has stepped in for people to be undressing or dressing women online, or, you know, making you turn around in pictures, or there's so much that is going on. So we feel that, you know, violence, especially in this particular period, has increased, and it has to be something that we address, especially through intentional policy, but also making sure that our leaders are intentional with addressing a majority of what happens. And of course, it directly also sometimes translates into mental health issues. That's why I'm going to start with mental health. It becomes very difficult for so many women to participate if they know the nature of what they are trying to step into is. If they know that, you know, these are spaces that are largely mated by violence, majority of them are going to shy away. They don't want to enter into spaces where they are going to be faced with violence, where they know that it's more likely for men to harass you for being in a public space than if you are quietly sitting somewhere in your office and you're minding your own business. So for majority of them, they feel that on the mental health scape of it, they cannot handle. So they would rather not join the space. They would rather not be in it. They would rather not compete. But also mental health has largely become a very big deal. And I feel that maybe largely before we enter into aspects of how we can, you know, cater to it, we have to look at what leaders should be able to do before we even look at the aspects of what other things can be done. A lot of mental health is coming from perspectives of what should be done to better people's lives. For example, if I'm dealing with poverty every day, I have nothing to eat, I cannot go to school, and yet my age mates are going to school, or I'm in a very poor school system where at the end of the day teachers are harassing me, they're sexually, you know, abusing girls. It becomes very complicated to continue to talk about mental health from a separated point of view, and yet at the top of it, even leadership should be able to address it from the nature of how they are, you know, leading people, from the nature of how, you know, policy plays into aspects of all this, or how the nature of how misuse of resources itself is leading to the frustrations of so many citizens, of so many young people, of so many women in different countries, because resources that should be going into, say, budget allocation for health services or for primary health care, where mental health could be a major, you know, aspect of how people access it and whatnot, is not being discussed because resources are being mismanaged. So it also comes from the nature of leadership that we have. if you're not catering to people properly to be able to address issues like unemployment, to be able to address issues like poverty, to be able to address issues like corruption, where resources are being wasted, it also frustrates the citizens, because this is where resources should be going. They should be going into public service that is not, properly catered to, because you're mismanaging resources, you're leading because of poor governance. But also, the African culture of mental health has always largely been backward and traditional. And for majority of the times, they've always assumed that mental health is a Western concept, or it's a concept for white people, which is definitely not true. So we've taken a bit longer to catch up with solutions, to catch up with catering to so many, especially young people that have to deal with these issues. And yet we could have done so much mindset change by then to make sure that we are finding solutions to how we can cater to mental health as a rampant issue, rather than dealing with it as a traditional or something that we are not aware of, or something that we do not know. So there's so much policy change that needs to change. There's so much stigma that is attached to it that has to end. But also, governments, like I've said, have to be very intentional about budget allocations to make sure that at least their budgets going into primary healthcare, to be able to train nurses, to be able to train professionals, to be able to ably diagnose mental health issues, but also make sure that more and more people are able to access the services and are able to be able to speak out, because it has become an open thing for every other citizen to be able to respond to. And lastly, of course, it cannot go without saying we have to have able leadership where violence is not the order of the day. Honestly, dealing with the trauma of violence is something else. And I understand majority of the times when either young people or women or people who are not used to political spaces, for example, are not willing to participate because they've seen the nature of violence that is meted against candidates who are trying to run. Or they know, especially for women, they know that the nature of violence that awaits them from men when they're attempting to run, the nature of stalking, the nature of, how much men are constantly harassing you, are trying to sleep with you, calling you at awkward hours. It's, some telling you that, we want you to give birth to our children. It's so much you can bear at the end of the day as a human being. And if you're not focused and have a strong vision, it's something that will take you out. So mental health is very diverse. And I feel that it should largely reflect in so many spheres. It should reflect in policy, and it should be prioritized by different leaders and governments to make sure that, services are reaching different categories of people, and that it's reflected at least through budgeting in terms of allocating resources to ably cater to it.
Thank you so much. But I think the biggest thing that I love very much is how you integrated the conversation and the work that needs to be done into like the national commitments that government needs to think about it. Because I think when we think about it normally, it's always almost like, what is my responsibility to me, but to my neighbor as well. But ultimately, it's about how do we build it into, the architecture of our governance system. So thank you so much for those reflections. I know Ndam has to drop out of the conversation soon, so I'll hand it over to you, first reflecting on what self-care has looked like for you, how it can look for different people in the work that you do, and then responding to the conversation about Ghana's policy of increasing women's leadership through a quota that is targeting 30% of women in leadership. The question was, will this actually help?
Right. So it's gotten late here. I'll take the first question because it has to do with Ghana's affirmative action bill, which is now, law has been passed into law. And then you said the first question was self-care. Did I get that right?
Yeah, the first question is self-care, and then the second one is policy.
Okay. So the bill is passed into law, and we have expectations that we can meet thresholds and we can meet some of the milestones that we want to meet as a country. Personally, I haven't been very, very big on government trying to make it into a law before the implementation is done. The bill has a lot of things, but there is the conversational part and there is the one that is on the books for everybody to want to follow. For instance, now we have 14% of women participation in parliament, which is very small as compared to other countries that are around us. And I think that this act has to be more, we are conscious about doing it. And one of the things Ghana is doing, which I mean, I like, it's a bit slow, but I like, is that we're trying to push the narrative of the he for she, so that the men are rather taking the roles of propagating for representation. But then I'm asking myself, like, why should it be so vigorous? Like, why should it be, we're insisting on the men to do it? We have to focus more on blending these things into the very fabric of our communities. And that has to do with making sure that our social welfare interventions are very right, because then there's so much issues that, you know, culminates into, and Yvonne was saying, how these abuses and lack of respect for people's spaces, and, you know, how do we erase all those things with some of the policies that we want to implement, but also making sure that we are living, we are walking the talk, like we are not just talking. So for me, I'm looking forward to Ghana doing a bit more than just signing something and say, hey, this is law, this is what we're going to do. We want to represent people in parliament. We want to see it tangibly in everything that we do. And for me as a person, when it comes to being in that political space or being in that narrative of wanting to stand up for what I believe in and making sure that I am shielded in my values, I think that you've not seen, I'm trying to find a way to describe how my approach is, because it's very intrinsic and it's very personal. And it has to do with how I even relate with people who come around me in what we're doing in politics. What I decided to do, and people think I'm very calculated, what I decided to before entering into the political space properly, into the national limelight, is to make sure that I started a family, that I had a very responsible man that I call my husband, who calls me their wife. And this is also another conversation altogether. People have had different opinions about it, but I realize that our communities have become very patriarchal, and people still feel that they can be able to speak to you anyhow and all of that. But sometimes they know that there's a threshold when you have met them at the point of expectation in regards to being a responsible person. Sometimes it's just how you would even put yourself together, right? So these are some of the things that I've done. Somebody might have a different approach and say, why do I have to do all these things just for me to be able to gain societal respect? Fortunately, but unfortunately, these are some of the things that we have to deal with. And this is how I tend to approach it, right? So everybody would have their own way which works for them, but at the end of it all, your integrity matters, and the things that you as a person hold really strong and dear to your heart as your values should be what you're representing all the time. And I mean, thank God that I'm a minister of God, and so it always helps that I'm able to sanitize and to sieve through some of these things every now and then. So and let me use this opportunity to also say thank you for yielding your platform, inviting me, and listening to me share some of the things that are pertinent to my community and my person. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for joining us and for sharing your experiences. I'm very excited to see the kind of collaborations that you guys will have, because there's a lot of interconnections between the work that you're doing. And as you've already started the conversation, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Esther, I will bring you in. Remember to start with the reflection on, self-care, what that looks like for you, but also to respond to the question that was asked around the idea of, there's gains in women's political leadership being more cultural, trying to think about issues of domestic violence, the economic disparities, and how we can begin to protect more of the women that may not necessarily be involved in politics.
Thank you, Mantata. I think I would like to start with a response to a question on what more can be done in order for us to protect more women. And I really hope I'm audible. It has started raining over here, so in case you hear anything, you can just let me know. I think that the first thing that we can do, and this is something that I've really observed from a lot of cases that we've had to deal with, is that we need to make it easier to leave. We need to make it easier to leave, because most of the times the reason that victims stay or tend to stay in these abusive relationships or marriages or situations is because they simply do not have anywhere to go. And that is not just referring to them being embraced back at home, to say, my daughter, my sister, you are welcome to come back if it's not working out, but it is also in the structures that we have in place as governments and as communities and societies. So making it easier to live means that we must empower women economically so that they do have an option to not depend on someone else for their livelihood, so that they do not have to feel that if I step away from this person or if I step away from the situation, then I will not be able to survive or my children will not be able to survive. So it is for us to really create targeted programs and interventions to ensure that women are able to just walk away without too much thought, especially into what am I going to eat tomorrow or how am I going to basically maintain a livelihood after that. And it also looks like us having government funded or even private sector NGO funded safe houses for women to be able to go to. So we call these safe shelters. We need to really ensure that we have more access to safe shelters within our cities, even within the rural communities, and that we also raise awareness about these particular centers so that every other person knows that if you are experiencing domestic violence or that if you have become a victim of that, then there is a safe space that you can go to and that your perpetrator is not able to reach you there and that you're protected. And something else that I think that we can really do more in terms of curbing domestic violence is really for us to not just talk about the laws, because I think the majority of us, in terms of like countries and nations, we have laws in place to say, you know, do not, this is a crime, and you can go to jail for it, or, you know, don't do this, we can open up a case and everything, but we are not fixing what I would like to refer to as that hierarchy or that chain, the justice system or chain, if you'd like to also use the same words that I did. And that is because in as much as there is a law, we have also found that a woman will have been beaten up, for example, they go to the nearest police station to open up a case. And in this context, the police officers are first time or are considered to be first time responders or respondents. And the first thing that they would ask is, but what did you do? What was the provocation? I'm sure you must have done something. People are not crazy. So somebody's not just going to stand up and decide that they're going to beat you or something of the sort. So I think it's important for us to train even these first responders at police stations, at hospitals, and basically just ensure that it is much more convenient for a victim to navigate the justice chain or the justice system without feeling like it's pointless and then eventually just going back to the same situation that was harmful to them in the first place. And I also think that it is important for us to have specialized GBV units, whether it is within the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Safety and Security that houses law enforcement officials. I think it is really, really imperative for us to have specialized units that are able to respond specifically to cases of domestic violence, so that a victim does not feel invalidated, a victim does not feel as though they do not have a safe space enough for them to speak about an issue that they're facing, and so that they feel that they are genuinely getting the help that they need in that particular juncture. And another thing is also that we need to, as a society, of course, and this is something that will require awareness and really a mindset change, is for us to know that, or for us to rather cultivate our societies, our communities, our churches, our local support groups, wherever it is that we are likely to congregate, or wherever it is that people are likely to go to ask for help, to also sort of establish them as support centers that do not just seek to silence what a victim is going through. We want to be able to create a space, even in society, where anybody can go anywhere and they're able to get the help or at least the support that they need while they figure out the next step that they need to take. So I think that is also a clarion call to each and every one of us to basically ensure that whether it is your house or whether it is the local tuck shop where everybody comes, the next person is sort of able to come and say, look, I'm going through this. And as a human being, you are able to sort of offer that shoulder and that information also to say there is a safe shelter here that you can go to so-and-so authorities and you're able to get assistance and you will be okay. And I think it is also important that we do not shield the perpetrators by saying, oh, I know Martin, I work with Martin. Martin can never give somebody a black eye. So I think it's important for us to also not become apologists in this case, and just always ensure that we are practicing Ubuntu in the sense that we are lending our hands, our shoulders, our homes, and really sometimes even our resources to ensuring that the next citizen has the support that they need. And to answer the question on self-care, I think really for me it goes beyond rituals or, just being like, okay, every Saturday I light a candle or something of the sort. And for me, it really, mental health and self-care really looks like taking some time off my phone, choosing not to engage on social media. It looks like prioritizing rest genuinely by, for instance, just sleeping at 8 o'clock, where on days where it is possible, of course, and on weekends when you're not working, then you just basically take some time to yourself, read a book that you like or a book that you've been meaning to read that you haven't had the chance to. And another thing that truly helps me is also spending time with people who pour back into me, because more than often you are in a position where you are giving energy, you're giving time, you're giving space, you're giving literally everything until you are spent with nothing left to give, or it seems so. But I think it has helped me very much to have people whom I can run to when I am empty, and I know that I will come back feeling rejuvenated and filled. And another additional thing that has helped in terms of self-care for me has been prayer. Really just retreating into a space and just, getting into a place where you're like, you know what, I don't think I can do this of my own strength, or I am so completely overwhelmed. Nothing is working even to recharge or anything. And I just need that quiet, still moment that will allow me to sort of get back to myself again. So that would be it for me, yeah.
Thank you so much for the submissions. And I think it's very beautiful that we actually end on self-care. So thank you to the person that brought us this question. It's very important. And I think it's very powerful that you've shared your own ways, or the ways that you think about your self-care and the ways that you explore it, but also thinking about what it can look like for others outside of you. There's also one more comment from Facebook that I think is very important as we wrap up. So the comment was, comparing Namibia, Liberia, and Tanzania, is the floating idea of women's energy, of feminist energy, a reality or fictitious? Women leaders come in all shape and manner. Certainly, we have both just Democrats, dominant place holders, and unjust dictators. Women leaders can be either violent or non-violent. There's no essentialist women energy that is incorruptible. Not all vaginas carriers are non-violent or just. And I think it's very important in the sense that it reminds us that us centering our conversation today on what the positive effects of, women in executive power have been for girls and women in places like Namibia and Ghana does not necessarily ignore the reality that being a woman does not automatically translate to you being a good leader or changing economies. We've got examples in Tanzania right now, what is happening with President Samia, that is actually reminding us that being a woman in power does not always mean that you will deliver, on the kind of change that people need to see. But I think that comment also reminds us that, reflecting on the normalization of femininity in politics when women come in, like in the example that Esther gave earlier of the current president, it does not necessarily bracket all women as embodying, this typical cliche feminine energy. But I think the conversation very much grounded in the idea of diluting what has historically been in masculine space, that has women trying to express this masculinity that they've been made to believe is what defines African politics. So thank you so much for that point, and I hope it's something that the person can expand on, share their own thoughts and some of the ways that we can think about it as young people. But before I close this conversation, it's been a very great conversation. Left to myself, I would love to continue listening to you guys. Because you're sharing very powerful experiences, very powerful thoughts. I want you guys to just give me your departing statement. It doesn't have to be anything big. You can give us, your closing word. It can be your closing statement. What is it that you want to say to, young people, but also remembering that today is the first day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So yeah, what's your closing word? What's your closing statement? I'll start with you, Yvonne.
Thank you. I think my parting shots will largely be that, young people are just capable of leadership as any other demographic. And I love the fact that, majority of them have taken up the mantle to show that they are ready to lead, that they have the energy, they have the vision, they carry just as much ambition to run different aspects of their countries as well as any other people. And it's very important for them to keep up that energy, but it's also very important for them to keep standing up for what should be the right thing. The fact that there are so many widespread dissatisfactions with leadership that may not be favorable shows that young people are awake and they know what they're doing. So we feel that the narratives around centering young people into one certain particular kind of corner should not be fair, especially since they've demonstrated that they're capable of knowing what the right leadership looks like, of knowing what good governance looks like. But also it's for them to keep that energy, to keep spaces safe. Online has a large network of communities. It's very important that we keep those communities safe so that everyone can ably participate and we all enjoy the different countries and nations we are in and live, we live happily with each other. It's very important.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Esther, over to you.
Firstly, I would just like to, of course, extend my sincere appreciation to you, Mantat, and the entire Resistance Bureau team for availing this platform and really for convening different leaders from across the continent, the diaspora, and really beyond to have conversations that matter and conversations that really are able to shape lives and mindsets. And I think in my closing, I would like to just remind us all that leadership is influence, and everything either rises or falls on leadership. And that statement is very important because many times we tend to think that for as long as someone is a leader or for as long as there's leadership, then it's going to be positive or it's going to be good or the outcomes are going to be tangible. But sometimes leadership can also cause things to fall. It can be negative. And that is something that can be applied to anyone, regardless of whether they are a woman or a man. So I think it is just important for us to rather focus on ensuring that we produce leaders who are competent, who have character, who are aligned and who are grounded. And that in terms of when it comes to women in leadership, that even as we, tell young women, you can do this, come and, for example, learn how to be a good leader through a leadership development program. It is important that we also prepare leaders who are not just inspired, who are not just motivated, but also equally prepared to navigate complexities, to navigate systems, to present competencies that are able to ensure that they get tangible outcomes out of whatever space it is that they are engaging in. And I think, that would be my closing.
Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you so much to Esnam and Absentia. And thank you to everyone who joined us live on Zoom, on Facebook, as well as on YouTube. Our conversation today highlighted very different parts of the experiences of young African women in politics from Namibia, Ghana, and Uganda. So we had Yvonne coming in to reflect on, running for president despite the exclusion from an all-male ballot and just grounding politics in the everyday experiences of women in Uganda. She also spoke about, the challenging perceptions of women and youth leadership and anchoring a campaign in community. We also had Esnam coming in to draw lessons from campus leadership, international politics, and just, foregrounding authenticity, credible track records, and the creativity of young people in electoral organizing. She also spoke about, election lounge and how she's working to bridge the gap between youth interest and actual candidacy and addressing some of the challenges that comes with the work that they do. We also had Esther coming in from Namibia, speaking from a very unique context where women hold the top 3 government positions and a majority in the cabinet as well, where she was describing the scrutiny that comes with leadership, the grounding of influence that women have, especially when they take up positions of power. She gave examples of how the presence of her own president has really changed the space for them, even though it's like a short It's a short time, so very curious to see how that looks as she continues to serve, but also ideas around, the presence of feminine energy in its different forms, and also just drawing from her role supporting a president and former president, pointing out issues of humility, patience, credibility, and also the need to understand policy processes for those of us that choose to engage with the government, pushing for certain things to be integrated. And also one of the things that she spoke about, the ideas of intergenerational dynamics, one of the things that we could learn being the importance of asking for help, but also having the right kind of, competences to actually take our positions and do the work. So, I mean, I could go on. You guys said a lot of powerful things, and we're excited to, share some of this as short clips across, the next couple of weeks. But this has been a very powerful conversation. The full video is accessible for anyone that might have missed it, or if you want to share it in your different spaces, it's on our YouTube channel, our Facebook pages as well. We're also on Instagram and Twitter. So if you don't follow us already, please follow us. We always announce like future conversations that we have. We also do have some one-on-one conversations that Jeff normally hosts that we share frequently across our platforms. So be on the lookout. You can also check out our website, www.theresistancebureau.com. You can check out the shows that we've had in the past. But for the women that joined today, my advice continues to be continue to find ways of learning from each other, building connections, because I think there's so much power that comes from us learning from each other. We avoid mistakes, but we also get to see what is working in other places that we could also adopt in other places. But also shout out to the other team in the Resistance Bureau that may not necessarily be hosting today. So Jeffrey Smith has been live tweeting today. Peter Dory has been handling our tech, but also the other team behind the scenes that continue to help us make this space a powerful space for conversation. So thank you, everyone. Goodbye, and see you in the next Resistance.